Brushes, they're not just for your kids' hairs, even though I don't really use one. Is it obvious? Let's talk about brushed motors today. So today, I'd like to talk about brush motors again. There are other videos that we have up on the channel. If you would like to check those out, they may have a little different style to them, a little bit different information. And I'm just gonna talk about brushed motors off the cuff today. So we have two types of main brushed motors, at least in the hobby realm. The first one is a sealed can, and the second one is a rebuildable. First, let's talk about the sealed cans. In a sealed can motor, it is exactly what it says that it is. It is a sealed can. These are typically going to be lower cost and sometimes lower quality, although the quality of our Holmes Hobbies sealed can motors are much higher than other ones in the industry. And we have done a few things to make them that way. I'll just say quickly: magnets, ball bearings on the front, really good brush compounds inside, but at the end of the day, these are essentially a disposable motor. You can't really take them apart. Well, you can, but it's really hard to get them back together, and a lot of times you'll damage them. The can is crimped over what would be essentially the end bell, and there are stamped pieces and molded plastic that keep our brush assembly together. A lot of times these will have a fan built in, and cost to value ratio on these is by far the highest, especially since we use the ball bearings and really got nice magnets on ours. It makes them extremely good on the value. And we've had reports of these sealed can motors easily getting 500 miles on them, if not more. You know, maybe abuse them in water, something like that. If you've got a kid that's just starting, the sealed can is a really good value for pretty much any use, as long as you don't need the most powerful, you know, the most torque dense. If you're not looking for the best of the best of the best, these sealed cans work great. As of the time of this video, average retail price on a nice sealed can is going to be between $15 and $20. Now, let's look at a rebuildable style motor. So a rebuildable style motor is going to have a little bit more in the way of componentry. And we're going to take this one apart and show you what's up with it. But as you can see, it almost looks the same as a sealed can. However, on the outside, you can see a little bit more of the business. So this one, here's our brushes going into our brush channel, and you can actually remove them and replace them. And that's why this is a serviceable motor. Here we go with two little screws on the end. I'm using a PH1, Phillips number 1 from Weha. We loosen these just a little bit, and some motors may be slightly different on assembly, but for ours, you can just loosen this, and now our end bell actually will rotate, and that's pretty much standard along all rebuildables in the industry. So now that we are able to rotate this, we can actually get it to a point to where it just pulls right off. But first, we want to make sure that our brushes aren't going to fall in. So we can either pull them out like that until they are essentially stuck, or the better way is really to just take your springs off. So there we go. I got the springs off. Our brushes are free moving here. So I'm going to rotate this end bell assembly, and it will just pull right off. Now we're going to have some washers on the inside, so usually a little bit of that comes right out. And now let's start talking about the individual components in this. All right, aha. So we have ourselves a lot of parts, and the rebuildable motor really can come into more and more and more and more parts. So let's go through all of it that I can possibly think about. Here on our end bell, we have our brushes, and these brushes slide in and out of the brush channel. So the gold portion that you see there is the upper part of the brush channel, and then a lower part of the brush channel is actually anodized in black, a little bit harder to see here. On the ends of these brushes are called brush shunts. These shunts carry some electricity and also bolt them down into the end bell. The springs themselves, here's the springs, we've got one for each side. Woo! The springs sit on what's called a spring post, and the way that they are wound, they push our brush into the brush channel, and that contacts the commutator. So the brushes and the commutator are what come together to essentially make the motor work by commutating it. Yeah. All right, what else do we have on this end bell? The molded portion right here is the meat and potatoes of the end bell, essentially. It's what holds everything together, so we could call that the end bell itself. There's also this little PCB here. This PCB has a couple of filter caps. It's really not needed with modern radios, but it does reduce arcing just a little bit on motors, so the higher end ones will still have those filter caps or filter PCBs built into them. We've got these two little screws, and these screws, as you can see when I flip it over, they screw into what's called a timing ring. And the reason that it's called a timing ring on this motor is because, like I showed you, when you loosen it, you can actually adjust the timing on there. All of the motors that come from Holmes Hobbies are going to be timed for 0 because in a rock crawler, our specialty, you don't know which way is forwards and reverse so easily. However, when you order them directly from us, you can have them timed for one direction or the other if you know which way that you need. And about 6 degrees of timing is a pretty good all-around efficiency point, and that works out pretty well. You don't have too much arcing when you go into reverse, you still have good braking performance, and you have just a little bit better efficiency when you're going forwards and you know which way is your forward direction. Here's the washers that were on top of our armature. We'll move these parts aside. The washers go on top of the armature because we need a pretty exact spacing. Not only will this keep your commutator and your brushes together, you want to make sure that it really doesn't move up and down, but it also makes sure that we don't crash on the bottom side, and when spaced properly, we don't have too much tension to close the can. You want just a teeny bit of play when you assemble it. Part of the armature is a lot of subparts, and normally we would just call it an armature or a rotor and we would continue on. But deep diving into this, here's our fiber washer on top. This is just another washer. As you can see, the reason for the fiber washer is to keep potential shorts away because our other washers are made of metal. We don't want shorts on the commutator. As you can see, there are many different segments to this commutator, and if you put a metal washer on top, it's kind of a high likely that you are going to end up having a short. So fiber washer on top. Our commutator itself is the business portion where the brushes ride. And as you can see on this 5-slot motor, there are 5 segments to the armature. If it was a 3-slot motor like our Torque Master versions, it would have 3 segments to both the rotor and the commutator, but this is a Crawl Master, so we're going to have 5 segments on it. The 5 segments will typically be smoother, but you will have a reduction in drag brake and torque. I kind of like the 5 segments. Crawl Master is my favorite. So continuing on here, our commutator is connected to the coils of wire, and you can call these turns, you can call them coils, but as you can see, we have this nice shiny copper wire that is insulated, and this is wound around these segments. And this would be a full pitch wind, maybe getting a little too deep for this video, but a full pitch wind is going to be as close to your magnet coverage as possible. That's really what that means, and we can look at that here in a second. You can also see this is a hand wound motor, so we're balancing these in-house with epoxy. There's 2 different ways that they can be balanced. You can either take away material through drilling, or you can add material with the epoxy if you want the best torque, if you want the best efficiency, and if you want the best startup at any position of the motor. Balancing with epoxy is by far the better way. Lower cost motors are going to be drill balanced. Higher cost motors are going to be balanced with epoxy like this. For all of our hand wounds that we have, we do this style. We do the epoxy balance style. So there are a few more additions to this. So our stack here, these are our laminations. It's individual laminations. That is what makes the stator, or you could call it the rotor, but the rotor is more of the entire thing. There's a lot of names that kind of overlap, but the stator laminations themselves with the coils of wire around it, that's what really does the work after the commutator and the brushes tell it what to do, of course. And then as a last portion, we have the shaft. And this is a ground, polished, and plated shaft in this particular motor. The shaft goes all the way from the top to the bottom, and it connects to the laminations themselves, so that when you get electromotive force, it transmits it to the shaft, and your pinion would sit right here and transmit your power to the outside. So there you go. There's the rotor, also known as the armature in a brushed motor. Here's our can. Our can is what holds the motor together in a brushed motor. It is made of steel, and we have magnets on the outside, or I'm sorry, on the inside of it. and the magnets transmit through the can itself to make a north and a south pole be one consistent field from top to the bottom. You have to use steel when you're attaching magnets because they want to be a pair. There is north and south on each one in opposite directions, and when you connect the back side of a north to the back side of a south, you have a field that goes through there, and then on the inside, your north and your south in opposing directions is actually going to go through the rotor itself, through the armature, through the stack of laminations, and that's going to connect the other side of the field. So you have an interior field going through your rotor, and you have an exterior field that goes through your can. This is standard for all motors. Doesn't matter if it's brushed or brushless, but you have two sides of a field that connect together as a full field together. It's very important that you have this connection together so that you have essentially happy magnets that are very effective. Down inside the can, let's see if I can get it to show up on camera, there is a ball bearing. There's also a mating ball bearing in the top of your end bell here. So the ball bearings is what rides on the shaft, or the shaft rides on the ball bearings, whichever way you would want to say. And even inside this motor here, we're going to have ourselves another spacer. Let's see if I can get this to drop out. They are typically magnetic, so they'll get caught on the magnets. One thing to be careful about when you're taking them apart. But that's pretty much the can. We've got a ball bearing inside. There are magnets. The magnets are bonded into the can, and the can also acts as a back iron to connect the two magnets together on the back side. If you go too thin on your back iron, it's like having too thin of a leg on your armature, and you lose a lot of electromotive force. The efficiency of magnets is directly correlated with how much back iron you have connecting them together. The better the back iron, the thicker the back iron, the better the connection is going to be, and the stronger that your field is going to be, the more torque, the more drag brake, the more efficiency under load. But the downside is slightly higher no load losses, which may or may not be a big deal. And for the average crawler, that's really not a big deal. So I err on the side of making sure that they're designed with enough back iron. I'm not trying to cut weight in that portion of the motor because that's active motor material. And you can go too far, really just with any of this. If you get outside of the golden zone, you go too far and it is no longer a happy motor. So I think that pretty much covers it all. We're gonna reassemble this. I know that our motors go together with a silver washer on the bottom, fiber washer on top, a brass, plus another silver on the top side. We put on our end bell. There's a little 0 and a mark right here, and you can just put that directly in line with the 0 mark on our end bell. For 0 degrees timing, I can say 0 one more time. And as a last note, I should say that there are two styles of brushes on the rebuildables. One is a stand up and one is a lay down. And as you can see, it is longer in the direction going up, I suppose you would say, is standing up. And a lay down, the brush would be the other way, where the wider points are sideways. The width is going this way instead of going back and forth this way. On a 5 slot, you pretty much have to use stand-up brushes. That is the correct width for the commutator segment so you don't get dead shorting. On a 3 slot, such as the Torque Master, you can use lay downs. There are downsides to that, especially with wear. But that's kind of a that's a deeper dive into tuning brushed motors, which maybe all would be interested in that. Let me know in the comments if you are. If you do have any more questions about the brushed motors, feel free to leave your comments below and we will definitely do our best to get to them. And in the meantime, I hope you found this informative. And as always, thanks for tuning in. Have a great day. You've made it to the end of the video. Hopefully that means you liked what you saw. If you want to help out the channel, you can like, subscribe, and definitely comment down below. We would like to hear new ideas from you, so be sure you let us know what you'd like to see. There are some other suggestions probably floating by my head right now that you can check out, and otherwise we appreciate your support and your help growing the channel.